Acceptance, The Language of Recovery by Jeff Rounds, Chapter 3, The Anatomy of Grieving. For the sake of clarity, it is important to understand certain universal truths in terms of the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha spoke in the truth of self-awareness and explained that attachment is the root of all suffering. He went on to explain that life is suffering, which is to say that at least for humans, life is not possible without attachment, and having emotional attachments to material world experiences causes suffering. Attachment is all experience that hold an emotional signature. Note that every moment in our lives, whatever we are experiencing is being recorded into our subconscious mind. These experiences are interconnected with our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Wherever we are emotionally invested, we are attached, and the more we are invested, the more we will suffer when the attachment is lost, broken, or challenged. Being attached creates the first stage of grieving, denial. Without our awareness, every human is in denial of something because we are all attached to something. A very simple and closed system. Having an emotional signature of zero or nothing represents the peace that comes with having no thoughts or emotions invested. People can be peaceful when in denial. If an attachment is lost, they are not peaceful again until they reach acceptance. Both denial in its unchallenged state and acceptance can be peaceful. Only when an attachment is lost, broken, or challenged do we become aware of whether this peace is a result of denial or acceptance. Acceptance can be faked or falsely induced using repression, willful ignorance, different forms of manipulation, or therapeutic conditioning. Superficial therapies such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, may reprogram an attachment as less harmful. However, this is often a repression, not an expression of suffering. Induced peace lacks the emotional intelligence and complete understanding that can only result from surrendering to our emotions and processing a loss. Breaking an attachment means changing our minds through completing the grieving process. At the core of every attachment is the emotional signature of shame. The peaceful spiritual part of us knows better than to become attached because we recognize the harm it causes. That knowing part of us is the conscience that guides and heals us. The more we ignore it, the more shame and attachment accumulates and the more harm it causes. Life is finite, and we all desire a life of comfort and pleasures without consequences. We tend to reject the reality that life is not kind, fair, or just, and nothing is promised to anyone. Without acceptance, we are blind to the complete truth that life is more peaceful without attachments. In the bargaining stage of grieving, our ego is in conflict with the peaceful part of us and causes us to feel shame, embarrassment, anxiety, stress, depression, and anger. In surrender, we judge and punish ourselves, asking why, as we let go of the logic, will, and desire to have something we want. Completing the grieving process is a loss of self and the awareness that although we cannot have what we want, life will be manageable anyway. Acceptance cannot be reached without surrender, often leading to crying, which many people fear and avoid. People have often been conditioned to hide, repress, and bury their tears, which only increases the amount of shame, aka trauma, we carry. In reality, crying is the most effective way to release trauma and the most direct path to gaining more acceptance. This book represents a model of grieving that varies from the Kubler-Ross model and is based more on personal experience combined with knowledge of 12-step recovery. The Kubler-Ross stages of grieving are described as 1. Denial, 2. Anger, 3. Bargaining, 4. Depression, 5. Acceptance. The mixed recovery actual grieving process is described as 1. Denial, unknowingly or willfully unaware of the presence of harm. 2. Bargaining, logic used to defend an attachment, thoughts that generate anger, anxiety, depression, and continued state of non-acceptance. 3. Surrender, letting go of control, allowing ourselves to feel every emotion no matter how painful. And 4. Acceptance, peace, the highest form of intelligence and understanding free from emotional attachment. Denial. Denial is a sincere state of mind. In denial, people do not see the harm in their attachments, which shows in their thoughts, beliefs, words, and behaviors. To a mind in denial, the way we live makes sense, and there is no need for change. We also tend to believe that we are right and that when negative things occur in our lives, it's not our fault, and we assign blame to something or someone else. Also in denial, people tend to brag and exhibit the traits common to narcissism. The more denial a person accumulates, the more they self-identify with their ego, logic, will, and desire, and lose a connection to life's spiritual, intuitive, honest, and self-aware dimensions. Every human is in denial about something. In fact, people who are offended by that statement are proof of the statement. All defensive responses, all anger and depression indicate denial that has been triggered in the bargaining stage of grieving. Anything that triggers us shows us where we are attached. However, we need attachments to function as humans because without logic, will, and desire, a human would simply lay still and die. Action would be pointless, and life would have no meaning. Life with zero attachments is likely impossible for humans and many living things. Using Buddhist monks as an example of having very few attachments, the act of living a peaceful, simple life and denying worldly desires still requires a collection of attachments. Denial can become a natural reflex to many things. Like exercising a muscle, people practice lying to each other and themselves, unable to face or express their honest feelings out of fear. We have the option of creating willful denial in ourselves, making excuses that minimize the presence of harm, with a paradoxical equation. It's not that bad. When examined more closely at the wording, ego reveals its true nature. It equals the harm. Is not equals denial. That bad equals the measure of how bad the harm is. This statement, written in full form, reads as, the harm is not as bad as the harm is, convincing us that we can manage even more if needed. Without a willingness to recognize the harm, people create the most convincing arguments in their bargaining process, and the story they use to convince themselves is the one that they express to others when the attachment is questioned. Example, I know I shouldn't smoke, but it helps me relax. Bargaining. Once denial has been exposed, humans engage their problem-solving abilities to maintain their attachments. In bargaining, people experience anger and depression in varying degrees. We tend to complain and point out flaws, expressing what we cannot accept. A challenged attachment often causes the human mind to become an excuse factory, rejecting new information. When angry, we bargain to keep what we want, and as we begin to accept the loss, we shift more into depression. Anger and depression may swing like a pendulum as our thoughts fight themselves, and we process the logic of bargaining, which may last for moments, years, or even a lifetime. It's important to note that when people express themselves with anger, they are often at their most exposed and honest, stating what they cannot accept, their most negative beliefs, excuses, threats, and accusations. People also use anger to harm or manipulate others as a form of emotional abuse, exaggerating harmful values while placing shame and blame outside of themselves. Expressing anger is needed to move through bargaining. Also, when anger is expressed, other people will sometimes accommodate our needs. However, complaining can become habitual, illustrating a mind constantly judging and experiencing thoughts of non-acceptance. People who complain and judge habitually often need the most acceptance and are the least able to experience it. It is possible to become emotionally attached to anything, including complaining. Friedrich Nietzsche speaks of how those who loathe still esteem themselves as those who loathe. People complain until their anger is exhausted and they become tired of thinking about a particular issue. An issue may fall into submission, unresolved and out of mind, but may be exposed with questions or memories that trigger the attachment. Once we have bargained, heard enough, and recognize that we are powerless over loss, we come ready to enter the third stage of grieving, surrender. Surrender. Surrender can be done willfully or may be forced by circumstance. In surrender, our emotions catch up to us, which is overwhelming. All the beliefs and emotions we hold now feel like punishments as we experience the shame, regret, guilt, and other fear-based consequences of loss. In surrender, we are learning and experiencing a biochemical transformation that many people would describe as a spiritual awakening. Oddly, even people with little or no faith will often say the words, "Oh God, please no, please not again. Take this from me. I can't handle it anymore. Oh God, why?" etc. In surrender, people become childlike and may cry, pray, and beg for death. In these moments, we may remember other times we have suffered and feel like we are being measured as worthless. All of this pain reduces humans to tears, provided there is a willingness to release the tears. Some losses may require tears to be expressed numerous times, and the memories may always result in tears, although the need for grieving may diminish each time. People rarely communicate surrender to each other. When they do, it may be tears mixed with anger, complaining, and/or confessing. Once we have cried until there is nothing left to cry about, and complain until all anger is exhausted, we let go of our logic, will, and desire to think about the loss and enter into the final stage of grieving and awareness known as acceptance. Each completed grieving process increases emotional intelligence, intuition, and humility. As the ego dies, the peace-seeking part of our existence grows in understanding, leading us towards acceptance. With great losses come great releases of energy, and crying is exhausting. Sleeping is recommended to regain balance and take a break from the bargaining mind. Because emotional pain is one of the most difficult things for humans to endure, it's important to remember that it will eventually end and we will completely lose the desire to fight. Surrender is the extreme expression of powerlessness and when we are most honest with ourselves. Daily surrender may be used as a form of emotional maintenance, freeing us from the desire to overthink. Acceptance. Acceptance is the highest level of human understanding. Without it, all knowledge is just attachments. Reaching acceptance, we have emotional intelligence and have resolved any logic, will, or desire we had attached to the loss. With each lesson in acceptance, we remove the need to think about our attachments. There is no longer any desire to bargain or complain, and our explanation of the loss is short and accountable. In acceptance, there is no longer a need to express anger or depression, and no desire to return to the memories that trigger the negative emotions. Acceptance is experienced in degrees and can either be increased or decreased depending on how we choose to think about what we are experiencing. In general, the less we think about memories, the more peace and acceptance we can experience. The purest forms of acceptance have no emotional signature at all and are peaceful. In acceptance, people behave selflessly while maintaining healthy boundaries. They are also more compassionate and able to avoid threats they intuitively identify. People with high levels of acceptance are proficient listeners because their minds are no longer filled with bargaining, and when they communicate, is mostly in terms of gratitude and confession. People in acceptance are non-judgmental and natural healers, examples of the peace they feel. As levels of acceptance increase, so does intuition, honesty, and gratitude. A person with a mind filled with bargaining will not experience much of the world of intuition. A mind free from bargaining can learn to witness many things and avoid the pitfalls created by fear-based thinking. People in acceptance also tend to have more faith in life and less struggle. They may experience less selfish ambition, more creativity, and a constant willingness to learn. People in acceptance are easier to interact with and will not have a desire to manipulate, control, or behave selfishly. Effectively grieving losses causes people to recognize their conscience and virtues, reducing desires to cause or experience harm. At our cores, we all have the same conscience and values, though we are often unaware because bargaining and denial block the information we all experience internally. In acceptance, everyone has the same moral code and knows the same things but has a different language to express it based on their personal life experiences.